Good morning. Welcome to our first FinOps event. Glad to see you all back in real life. Glad to see the people following the live streaming. This is going to be the new setup, having some people in the room, some people over live stream, a bit more technically complicated. So it's our first attempt to do that. We will see how this goes. Today we host an event on the topic of cloud financial management, also known as FinOps. We will do this with some theoretical explanations of what FinOps is, what cloud financial management is. But we didn't just want to do a PowerPoint slideshow. And we do this event in collaboration with one of our customers, Ahold Delhaize. We have one of our key contact persons, Koen de Vos, in the room. And what we will do is we will twice do a short presentation and then have a conversation what it means for a real customer to do FinOps. That's the setup of the event. There's a break in between the two parts. So the agenda looks like this. First, an introduction, which I will do myself. Then we will have some sort of an interview with Koen. We do a short break. And then my colleague Sam, who is the FinOps practice lead in 45Degrees, takes over to explain how we do these FinOps projects, FinOps programs. It's more than a project. Again, followed by a conversation with Koen on how we do this in real life, day in, day out at Delhaize. So, without further ado, let's move to part one. Part one, positioning. So positioning, I will start with why is financial management different in a cloud environment compared to a traditional on-premise environment? Because that's a key starting point. Why is it different? As a next step, I will position it in a broader cloud journey. A transition to the cloud comes with a lot of opportunities and a lot of challenges. Where does FinOps fit in? Then we will elaborate a bit on what's the difference between pure cloud cost management and FinOps, because there's a difference between those two things. Then we will speak a bit about how does a FinOps team look like? Who's in there? How do you put that team together? What type of roles do you need to have in such a FinOps team? And to finish the first part, we will look at the key FinOps principles. FinOps principles, at 45Degrees, we've decided to use the framework of the Global FinOps Foundation, which obviously we need to fill in with some very pragmatic and practical ways of working with our customers. But we based ourselves on an industry standard from the FinOps Foundation. So these 6 FinOps principles are coming from that global best practice. Now, why FinOps? Why cloud financial management? AWS did a survey with their top 300 consuming customers and asked them, what is your biggest challenge with the cloud? What came out of it is that 29% actually said cost management, controlling the costs. Now, when you drill a little bit deeper into the answers provided by the customers, you see that it's not just that 29% on cost, which they consider as their biggest challenge. They also speak about aspects of control and visibility. Now, the interesting thing is, control and visibility in a cloud environment is quite often immediately followed by cost challenges. So when you add it all up, I let everybody do the math for themselves, about half of the cloud challenges are somewhere linked and related to a different financial model in a cloud world. Now, why is this so different? Why is it different in 6 different topics? So first of all, it's a new consumption model. The best way and the easiest way to compare it is with electricity, which turns out to be very expensive these days as well. If you subscribe for whatever type of license scheme with Microsoft, AWS, at the beginning you pay nothing. When you start consuming, you start to get an invoice. In a traditional model, you need to do your upfront investments. You need to build your investment plans. You need to order your hardware, your software, install it. You need to have a data center to put it in. So you do a whole load of upfront investment, which you pay upfront. But there's not going to be a monthly invoice from a consumption point of view. So if you drill one step deeper, you basically can say that you have a variable spend model compared with a fixed cost model. The outcome of that is, you could say that an on-premise traditional environment is predictable and stable. And when I speak with our CIOs, that's also what they say. I have my spreadsheet, I've been using it for years, and I know exactly what my cost is going to be. See some people in the room smiling because they heard the same CIO say the same thing. A cloud model is very different. There's a lot of opportunities in there, and you can have a push for efficiency, which you can literally do from one day to the other. Total different model. This is a real critical one. I hope there's no purchasing officers in the room, but this is the point where we need to tell them, you lost a bit of your power. Because the power of spending in a cloud world is with the engineers. At least it's with the engineers if you leave it at that. We're going to come back to that a bit later. But the long purchasing cycles, purchasing negotiations, which most of us have been part of, they are still there, but they are much less relevant because the spending happens by the technical people. So instead of these long procurement cycles, you're actually in a world with instant spending. It is literally possible that an engineer spins something up, nobody notices it, until the end of the month, there's a big invoice coming. Now, obviously, the whole idea behind FinOps is to avoid these things from happening, or at least catch those as soon as possible. Now, last but not least, if you do a traditional IT investment, there's not much room for failure. It's a big investment, it's a long cycle, and then whatever you do, it needs to be spot on. In a cloud world, it's a different world. A cloud world is a world where you can do experimentation, you can spin something up, try something out. If it works, fine, you can bring it to the next level. If it doesn't work, you switch it back off, and your consumption goes back to zero. Nothing happened. So 6 ways of looking at how cloud finances is fundamentally different from traditional IT finances. Now, this is an interesting story. I'm not going to call out customer names. Okay. This is what typically happens. Customers start using cloud. They do a little bit of a test, and there's a little bit of consumption. And then they onboard the first application, and the consumption goes up a bit. And they onboard the second application, and the consumption goes up a bit. And then suddenly, nothing happened, no new application, nothing happened. but the next invoice has a big spike in it. The image is not by coincidence covering 2 months of the spike, because without cloud financial management, first of all, it often takes 2-3 weeks before somebody even discovers a big invoice came in. Then somebody asks the question, does anybody know why this big invoice came in? And before somebody found out why, it's not actually 1 month, but there's already a new invoice coming in and there's a second month. And then the problem is fixed and the costs go down again. So that's typically one of those moments where we get a call, usually from a CIO level person, can you come and have a chat with us because I don't like this model. That's reality. Now, we did send out a survey to everybody, the people in the room, the people online, with 5 questions. And the 5 questions were chosen to give us an idea on some of the aspects we're covering in this event. The questions are coming from a maturity assessment, which is why you see at the bottom of the slide 0 points, 5 points, 10 points, 20 points. I left it on. Obviously, these were 5 questions out of a broader maturity assessment. It's a maturity assessment we do with customers when we start up an engagement for the first time. So we had 5 of these questions, and we will show the results of the full audience, people in the room, people online, what the answers were that we got back. So obviously, after the previous slide, a first question was, when do you learn about these cost spikes? Well, cost spikes that are significant enough to be triggering something. So what we see with the audience we have today is that almost 3/4 are basically answering, I don't know. Which, in all fairness, is very representative of what we see in the market today. We see that some people are saying sometime at the end of the month, right? And then the interesting one, the last one, is nobody answered that one, but it is possible to go to a point where you can basically get an alert before that cost spike happens. That's possible. Somebody spins something up which is not normal. There's an anomaly detection happening, which triggers somebody to say, check this out, that's not normal. So it is possible to go as far as finding out about something before it even triggers a big invoice. Now, part 2. Some of our customers call this the house. Some call it the castle. Actually, my friends at Deleuze call this the castle of Kronos 45 degrees. This is everything you need to think of when you go on a cloud journey. To be honest, this is everything you need to think of when you run an IT operation. And then the question is, what do you need to do specifically in a cloud world for each of these capabilities? Now, I will not cover that part of the story today, because then we're still here this evening. FinOps is part of the strategic pillar in a cloud center of excellence. That's where it positions. So it is one of the strategic capabilities in a broader cloud journey. Okay. There's something wrong with this slide. So I'm going to skip it for now, and we will come back to it because this is the same pie chart as the previous one. Something with the syncing happened. Next topic. When customers call us today, often they had a cost spike. One of them called it the invoice from hell, which we got. and we got the invoice from hell from Microsoft. Okay. Can we have a chat? I never want to have an invoice like that again. And we actually make a distinction between cloud cost management and full-blown FinOps. Now, the topics you see in each box are FinOps capabilities. These are capabilities which are part of that framework which I was referring to earlier on. And so what we basically did is we split them in, if you only want to do cloud cost management, then you basically focus on showback, which basically means make your costs visible. What I can say there is, in that first conversation we often have with our customers, customers are thinking about the invoices where I see my costs. Well, that's actually a starting point. The invoice is not where you should look at your costs. You need to have other means of understanding your costs before it's actually on the invoice. To be honest, whether you take an invoice of Microsoft or AWS, nobody will be able to completely understand it. You need to have your costs visualized in a different way. That's what showback means. You want to have your costs also visualized in a way that makes sense for your organization, not just generically the way the costs are triggered. And then you want to move into topics like waste reduction. Cloud spending is typically one of those things that after some time you have a lot of costs triggered by services that are no longer in use. You're going to start looking at usage optimization, which can be as simple as switching off the services overnight if you're not using them overnight. Now, I have the easy part. I can just explain it like that. These gentlemen can explain that that is much more difficult. Rate optimization is another topic. If you know exactly what you have, you can optimize, or what you need, you can optimize your rate. Getting budget alerts is another foundation of cloud cost management, which means even cloud cost management can already be quite sophisticated, because it means you have to understand your budget, you have to plan them, and then you create alerts. And last but not least, the point I was referring to earlier on, anomaly detection. Well, if something happens which is out of the normal, something is triggered. So the way to work in a FinOps environment is not that every morning somebody opens up the cloud portal and starts for a manual check to see if something weird is going on. Those are the cloud cost management basics. That's what we do when a customer wants to have the basics covered. If you go to full FinOps, you cover all of these, obviously. So it's an and story. But then you really start to work on topics like organizational alignment, cultural fit, IT finance integration, the topics you can read on the screen. FinOps is a word that is not invented just like that. Sounds like DevOps. The whole idea behind FinOps is that you operationalize these FinOps practices into your daily operations. That's the whole idea behind full FinOps. So it's not just a separate, that's why I stopped earlier on when I said a FinOps project. It's more a program which keeps running and which you operationalize over time. A question we often get is, okay, fine, I want to start with cloud cost management. Do I need to build everything myself based on the cloud native tools? And the answer is no. I'm actually extremely happy that we can announce today that we have a partnership with Aptio, market leader in the type of software that helps you do FinOps and cloud cost management. There's going to be more published on that. The purpose of today is not to share that, just to announce it. And why can a tool be interesting? Well, a tool can be interesting because it offers you possibilities to go much faster, to get a grasp and a view on your cloud spending. When you opt in for a tool, you basically bring a whole load of knowledge in the organization. You still need to apply your business knowledge to the tool, obviously. There's no miracles, but the tool helps you with a lot of those things. The tool really helps you if you try to do the more complex things. More complex things like instance reservations and those types of things. That is really where you can take optimal advantage of a tool. Now, this is not a tool speech. I'm just sharing the decision on tool, no tool is a decision you need to take at a certain point. Who's in that FinOps team? Well, that's actually one of the more interesting parts of doing FinOps, because there's a whole bunch of strange people around the table which usually are not in our traditional IT projects. Top of the screen are executives, and think of the invoice from hell. They usually have a very keen interest. Quite often, FinOps programs are triggered by an executive who had a bit of a surprise. So they keep a seat at the table. And what we typically do, and they will come back to that, where usually an IT project, you have your iterations and you work with a lot of people in the organization. There's typically a couple of iterations specifically targeted at stakeholders and executives in FinOps programs. I'm sure Koen and Sam will come back to that later. FinOps, cloud, that is an agile world. So we need the business around the table, call them product owners, but we need business representatives around the table. You want to reflect your costs in a way that makes sense for your own company. An example of one of our customers, one of the divisions wanted to do something really fancy. And the first reaction of the CIO was, but hold on a minute, this is going to cost at least $100,000 of consumption each month. So we can't do that. It's not in my IT budget. Okay, stop. In a cloud world, I hope the department that came up with the idea is going to make much more money than the $100,000 consumption. But what you need to do is you need to be able to allocate the cloud costs on a monthly or a regular base to the division that actually is generating the costs. So you need the business owners around the table to make those types of trade-offs. Completely the opposite side, you need technical, I call them engineering resources around the table. Remember in the beginning where I said the engineers are triggering the costs. So part of it is also an education effort. And yes, obviously you can customize your environment so that people can not just pick whatever they like to pick. That's true. But you need engineers around the table early on to define what is going to be used. Think of the link with a cloud center of excellence. A customer is going to make a landing zone. The landing zone has a lot of building blocks in it. Suddenly there's a request coming for a new cloud initiative. And maybe you don't have that in your current reference architecture. What we usually see is that when people are allowed to pick and choose from the big Azure or AWS box, they will always pick the most expensive bits. But they are not always necessary. So engineering need to have a seat at the table and need to understand how financially the whole cloud setup works. Yes, we're working in an agile mode. We're working in an agile way. They will explain that later on. But we still need some program management for the overarching FinOps program. And then obviously, you need the finance people on the table. I did myself a couple of workshops where it's really interesting to see that the IT people and the finance people come to the table together in the kickoff meeting of a FinOps program. And the type of information exchange that happens there immediately explains why the FinOps program is needed. Questions like, yeah, well, I did get that monthly report with the costs, but actually that's not how we are organized from a finance point of view. So the report is probably correct, but I can't use it. Those types of conversations happen immediately when you start this type of program. And then you have a last but not least, the FinOps practitioner, FinOps architect, whatever you want to call it. That's the subject matter expert that understands how the methodology works, that understands how the framework works, and that is basically giving the necessary input to guide and help the customer. Can be an internal resource, can be an external resource, can even be multiple resources depending on how the organization is set up. We'll skip this slide for now. So, what is FinOps? FinOps is basically the financial operating model for the cloud. And it's a combination of systems/tools, best practices, cultural aspects. It's a combination of all of the above. And the aim is to help make trade-offs to get most value or best value out of the cloud. So real FinOps goes much beyond just the cost aspect of the cloud financial system. Last slide. The 6 FinOps principles, which you will find if you check out the FinOps Foundation. Basically what we're saying is FinOps is all about team collaboration. So part of what I try to explain in this first presentation is it's not something one person can do somewhere in a corner. It's not a technical thing only. It's not a financial thing only. It's not a management thing only. It's a combination of all of these things. It all starts with accessible and timely reports with multiple flavors. The flavor that each one of the typical roles needs to have in order to make sense out of the data. The whole aim is to help the business make value-driven decisions. That's the whole aim. Having the costs under control is the starting point. Moving to value-based decision-making is the end goal. And obviously, if you think about the slide with the arrows, the whole aim is to make best use of the variable cost model. The variable cost model is what it is. The whole question is to make best use of it. No matter how many product teams you have in your organization, if you're already in a model with self-running product teams, we always see at least one central FinOps team. And I'm saying at least one. It depends on your organization setup, how many of those teams you do have. And last but not least, I did the circle in that round. FinOps is only going to work if every player in the cloud environment takes responsibility, ownership, and accountability on what is happening. I do compare this with, well, if somebody always leaves the lights on in the room, there's going to be a lot of electricity consumption. That's an individual responsibility. For those of you with kids or teenagers in the house, you know perfectly what I'm talking about. Same is true. There's probably not much teenagers working in a cloud environment, but there's a lot of engineers there who tend to do the same type of thing in a cloud environment. So that said, I want to hand over to, that was the theory, I want to hand over to Sam and Koen to hear how all of this works in reality.